Hiya and welcome back. It's a nice cold but sunny January morning, and after doing the chores I've get myself out to do another video and talk about the subject that rarely if ever gets discussed now, and that's measuring of the rows. Now, when I was in my teens 40 years ago, we religiously measured all the roses on the youngsters as we winged them before we trimmed the rows off. Then we'd measure them again when they had molted out. We'd measure them at yearlings, and then we'd measure them as 2-year-old adults. Now, if the bird was looked after correctly and given all the right nutrition and molted out in good health, usually the roses would get bigger, and usually up till about 3-year-old you would find that's when the roses was at the best. And this still holds pretty much true now. Back 40 years ago, if you had a bird with a 2.5-inch rose, it was classed as a big rose. The standard, even up back in the early 2000s, a 2.5-inch round, flat, thick rose was still perfectly acceptable. And now we like them around about the 2 3/4 inches, which I think that's about 7 centimeters. Old school, imperial, not metric, so I go in inches. So now I would like most of my adult cockbirds to have roses that were bordering on the 3-inch wide. Now, when we talk about 3-inch wide roses, we talk about measuring of the roses, we are only concerned about the width. The length should be the same as the width, i.e. to give the roundness of the rose. But when you hear somebody say we've got a rose and it's 3.5 inches and they've measured from the back of the rose to the front of the rose, that's not what we're talking about. That's not what I am talking about. It's not what I was taught, and that certainly was not how the world, or the Western world, has measured roses for the last 120 years. We measure them across the eyes. Ideally, width of skull, flatness of skull plays an important role in your rose. So why would you measure them? Well, we'd measure them to keep an eye on them. We'd measure them to, when we were pairing our birds up, usually the number 1 parent or the number 2 parent back in the day would be our largest rosed male mated with the largest rosed female. Now, back in the 1980s and early 90s, before we got the American imports in that had a lot longer feather than what our birds had, our roses were smoother, thicker, and the skulls were flatter. The American birds had longer, more elongation, but more length of feather. Ours was better quality feather, but they had the length of feather. But that, as we know, is a different story. So now we would measure them and we'd keep track of them, just to, like everything, we'd measure the foot feathers, we'd measure this, we'd measure that. Now we don't seem to measure like we used to. We look at the standard drone, we say, well, which looks like the standard drone, we'll try and mate for that. A lot of areas, myself included, for the first 20 years, I would mate primarily on row size, and all the other features I like within the breed, I'd focus on that. Roundness of chest, short, wide, cobby birds, wide tails, nice short round wings. These were the features I liked. These are the things I concentrated on. Shell, as long as it had a cupped shell and it was high set cup shell, I was pretty much okay with that. When we got the American birds in and we started getting the American pigeon journals, and we looked at these wrappy shells or these big cuppy shells and more open shell, we followed that along. Now remember, I'm talking 30 years ago here, not 3 years ago. And I'm not talking 4 generations ago, I'm talking 40 generations ago. So it was a long time ago. So what we would do is we would breed for the roses, but now I seem to think that a lot of emphasis has been taken from the rose and put onto the shell, taking the points away from the rose and putting them on the shell to make the shell and the rose 2 very important and equal features to form the headpiece. That I am in agreement. I do agree with that. But what I'm finding is, when you look, a lot of the roses are not getting the attention that they need. So anyway, what I did was this morning, I've done a couple of videos on a couple of old cockbirds, both 2019 birds, and we've measured the roses, and I showed you how we measure roses and that. Nothing haven't been seen before. So I've tagged them on the end of this and you can watch that. Right, so if you've stuck around this song and you want to see a bird with a 3-inch rose, it's coming right up. See you later. It's a little bit windy, so I don't really know how this is going to turn out, but I just thought I would show you how we measure roses, and that this is the correct way to measure a rose. So when we talk about roses being 3 inches wide, or 3 inches, what we're referring to is the width of the rose, and not, this is not the best tape measure, but it's the only one I can find, not the length of the rose. So to measure roses, you measure across the eyes from there to there, there to there. So I've put this Coca-Cola can there as a guide, just as a rough guide of how big the head is on this bird. This is a 2-year-old red cock, and his rose is 3 1/4 from tip of beak to the back of the skull, and across the eyes he's just very shy of 3 inches, but depending on which way you hold the tape measure, he's 3 inches. So this cock is 3 inches wide in the rose. This is going to turn out, this is an old black cock bird from 2-year-old 2019. So this is his 3rd season. This is Thanos. He's my main black stock bird, and again his rose measures over 3 inches wide. So from top to bottom it's 3 1/2 by over 3, slightly over 3. This is probably the biggest headed black that I've ever seen, but like you say, no doubt somewhere in a small little village in the middle of nowhere there'll be one with a head that's 3 times bigger than this. So this is one of them small headed birds that I breed from. Just thought I'd show everybody this one.